Shalom Aleichem. Today is Yom Hamishi Shabbat, Thursday, Kaf Ba'adar Tavshin Peheh, according to our calendar, the 20th of March 2025, according to the Gregorian calendar. And we continue in Hilchot Teshuvah, the Rabbi Rambam. We are now in Perek Sheni, Halacha Yod Aleph or Taif, depending on your edition. So, Rambam states as follows: Eina Teshuvah v'lo Yom HaKippurim lechaperim, ela averoth sheben adam lamakom. Teshuvah, in and of itself, or Yom HaKippurim, in and of itself, or the two of them together. Because we discussed that Yom HaKippurim itself, Ithumos Shel Yom, the actual day itself, has a certain power of kapara, to bring about kapara, forgiveness, or that is to say, the wiping the slate clean. Teshuvah certainly does. But these things work without further effort or without doing anything beyond that. These things are efficacious with regards to Aviroth Sheben Adam Lamakom, between a person and Hashem. Kirchot, such as Misha Achal Davar Asur, someone who ate some forbidden foodstuff, someone had an irresistible desire to have a shrimp salad, L'mashal Lo Aleno, or Ba'al Be'ila Asura V'chayat Sebahem, or a person sinned in a way which is not at all uncommon, as Chazal say, as Chazal mention, as human experience also indicates, some illicit sexual liaison. So as soon as a person does teshuvah and feels true remorse and says vidui, etc., that avera is no more, that it is wiped away. Aval, however, averot sheben adam lahavero, when a person sinned in or did something which either directly or indirectly impacted another person negatively. Kirchon, hovel havero, someone who he struck his fellow Jew and caused him injury. It could also just be a bruise, shall we say. It doesn't have to be a broken limb or anything more serious. Obviously, the more serious the physical damage, the more serious the avera in case of a hovel mazik. Kirchon hovel havero, or hamekhalel et havero, or he who even just curses his fellow Jew, or gozelo v'chayot sebahem, or stole from him. Eno nimhal lo le'olam, this sin will never be forgiven, ad she'yiten lahavero mashehu hayav lo, until he repays this person, v'yirasehu, and also begs his forgiveness. And therefore Rambam continues, Halacha Yod Bet, Af al pi she'hazir lo mamon shu hayav lo, even though he repaid the monetary value of this action. In other words, from the point of view of torts, speaking legally, in terms of the monetary value of the damage caused, even though he has paid this, tzarich lerastoto, he has to beg his forgiveness and apologize, and beg him that he forgives him. And even if he only caused this person pain by speaking to him in an improper fashion, speaking to him in a very harsh unkind manner, for example, which hurt his feelings, even if that's all that he did. He must. The word defaiso we've already explained, which means to try and appease him. If you look at the word lefayes and the word appease, you will see very similar consonants, probably not coincidental. Rambam adds here lifgu'abo. Lifgu'a means to go to make very, very intense efforts and not try once, say, well, I'm sorry, and you don't want to forgive me, okay, fine, it's your problem. No, you have to go out of your way to a very, very significant extent. Lifgu'abo means to, like the word tefillah, the word lifgu'abo tefillah, it means to pray and beseech Hashem, not simply make a request and without much feeling or emotion and leave it at that. Lifgu'a is the opposite. It's heartfelt and intense. And here it's the same. So it goes without saying that when a Jew harasses another Jew, for example, he didn't actually hit them or strike them, but he harassed another Jew deliberately, such as one of the Kapla Nuchbot, one of the Erev Rav, as I saw last night on the news. There's apparently an individual. He's known. He's been filmed many times doing these kinds of things, intimidating, harassing, and damaging property. There was a woman of right-wing sensibilities, shall we say, not chas v'shalom, a religious woman as far as I can tell, but a woman who did not agree with a certain poster and was removing this poster, which was placed in an area which a public space where no one had any right to place it, and that area was under some kind of observation or surveillance, and this person appeared. This is all on film, and begins first of all abusing her verbally, which is what we said before. Hiknit et havero. He abused her verbally, also using sexual innuendo, and he threatened her, and then he grabbed her car key from her hand and threw it onto the road, which resulted in it being broken. So then she was unable to move her car for 6 hours, etc. So such a person has a great deal, if this person would at all be disposed to become a real Jew, which I very much doubt, then this person would need to expend tremendous efforts to do Teshuvah and to achieve Mechila. I assume that he will never do such a thing, and the sooner that we are rid of all such people, the better. And if such a person is amongst those who have on occasion threatened, so to speak, in inverted commas, that they will go on Yerida and leave the country, I would be willing to participate in his airfare. Such people are only cause us such tremendous harm that we should actively be asking perhaps President Trump to add them to the list of people who need to be relocated. Tov, halacha yod gimel, lo rasa havero limcholo. If his fellow Jew against whom he sinned in this or that fashion refuses to forgive him, mevilo shura shel lishrosha bnei adam mere'ah. What he must do is as follows. Again, we're talking about making very serious efforts to make amends and to achieve a proper state of ahava, of brotherly love and respect between two Jews. He must bring 3 of this person's friends or acquaintances. Ufoga'im bo, again the word poge'a in this sense, meaning to entreat him vigorously. They ask him to forgive this person. So first he has to find 3 people willing to do this for him. Lo nithrasa lahem, and nevertheless this person did not wish to forgive. He does this, has to do the same thing again, a second time and a third time. All this should, by now, a person reading this, learning this, should become more and more increasingly aware of how serious whatever it is that he did, how serious it is to be considered, and to what lengths he must go to achieve mehila. Lo rasa, nevertheless this person refused. Maniho v'olechlo, then he, after having gone through all this, which involves also a certain amount of embarrassment on the part of the sinner, having to do all these things and request time and again to be forgiven, which means that he had to tell people what he did and how it happened and all the rest of it. So a person cannot be haughty and incapable of internalizing what they have done in order, if they are to achieve this level of effort to achieve mechila. So a haughty person, a person with a tremendous ego, will never achieve this. In other words, Teshuvah here implies and necessitates a true change of character, and a person has to work on oneself very seriously to get to that point. Lo rasa maniho v'olechlo. At some point, you can't tell a person you have to do this forever. At some point, he can drop it, leave it alone, leave him alone. Wazat shalom mahal, and then the Jew who refused to forgive him, he is the sinner. But of course, the person who was harmed or attacked or threatened or what have you, they have to feel that this person is serious. They really mean to beg forgiveness and that they have truly repented. If a person doesn't feel that, does not believe that, they're not required at all to forgive. That only would encourage and strengthen the evildoers. V'im hayav ribo or rabo, if we're talking about his Rav who did this to him, I'm sorry, that the person sinned against. If the person against whom he sinned is his Rav, holech uva afilu 1000 pa'amim ad shimcholo, then he's required to do this even literally 1,000 times. That is to say, without any specific limitation, ad shimcholo, until he forgives him. And Rambam continues, and why is this the case? That a person must forgive. Why can a person not simply say, if Hashem wants to forgive him, okay, it's not my concern, it's not my business. Hashem can forgive him, but I do not forgive him. Rambam says, Lefi she'asur le'adam sheyeh achzari v'lo yitpayes. A Jew towards a fellow Jew we're talking about is not at liberty to literally to be cruel, that is to say, to be heartless, and to refuse to be appeased no matter what. Ela yeh noach l'ratzot v'kashe lichos, as the Mishneh states. In other words, a person should be easily appeased and only very rarely and with great difficulty brought to a point where they are seriously angry and upset and ill-disposed to forgiving a person. And when a person asks another Jew to forgive him for what he did to him, he should forgive with a full heart of a nefesh hafesa, willingly. Even if this particular person in the past caused him great distress and trouble and sinned against him in many ways, many times. He is not allowed to requite him in any such way by acting similarly towards that person. In other words, to act in a vengeful manner and bear a grudge. This is the way, this is one of the character traits of Am Yisrael, This is the natural disposition of the Jewish people. In other words, those who are of the Jewish people can be expected to behave in such a way. Aval hagoyim arle lev. However, humanity at large are arle lev, literally of uncircumcised heart. In other words, as a rule, they do not possess such qualities. Such qualities are not stressed and not encouraged in most societies. Ela mu'ivratho shemara nesah, as the pasuk states. In other words, they bear a grudge and their anger is for all time. וכן הוא אומר על הגבעונים, לפי שלא מחלו לישראל. With regards to the Givonim and their behavior towards Mishpachat Shaul and Am Yisrael, lo, לפי שלא מחלו לישראל, they did not forgive that which had transpired in the past, in the time of Yoshua, etc. והגבעונים לא מבני ישראל המה. The pasuk stresses the Giv'onim, even though they were some kind of ger toshav or some form of resident, then lo mibnei Israel hema. They did not adopt Jewish ways and Jewish practice and Torah values. So here again we have some interesting statements from the great universalist Rambam, as some people choose to pretend to see him. But as we see time and again, Rambam was no such person at all. Rambam was an ish emeth, and he always tells it like it is.
Rabbi.
Yes.
In these halachot, we learn about something that you do to your chavero, right? Lo ratzah chavero.
Yes.
And in other contexts, chavero, re'ah, these terms mean a member of Bnei Israel, as opposed to just a person at large. And even more so, Rambam connects these points about pius with lothikomu lothitor, which also only applied to Jews. So do these halachot about pius and mechila only apply to Jews as well? Or is this something that a person should try to...
In essence, all these halachot, all that we have learned today, all this applies to relations between Jews, in principle. Now, is it possible that a person has a fairly civil, maybe even more than civil, relationship with a non-Jew? who is not an anti-Semite and not in any way ill-disposed to the Jewish people. And they usually get on quite well, but they had some run-in. Is it correct to therefore say that this Jew should not, and he was at fault in some way, perhaps. So also he thinks, so he feels. Is he to be told, no, you should not ask for forgiveness? No, I'm not suggesting that. I think in such a case he should. But as you correctly point out, the real thrust of what we're learning here, of what Chazal say about these things, as indicated by the reference to lo yikom v'yitor, which applies to Jews only, bearing a grudge and being vengeful. The main thrust of all this is to preserve the ahawa, the feelings of connection and love that must exist between all Jews. That is the main concern here. And if a person caused damage or harm, even if it was only insult to a fellow Jew, this is something that cannot be taken lightly at all. Most definitely not. That's not to say that it's advised or proper to deliberately insult a non-Jew. Not at all. If it's totally uncalled for, then why would you do that? On the other hand, if it is called for, well, that's something else. But no question, these halachot are aimed almost exclusively to inter-Jewish relations. And the same, and you can also understand this. This is also implied or quite obvious from the following and final halacha in this perek, which states as follows: Halachat Tetwa or Yud Aleph, Ahotah lahaviro, he who sinned against his fellow Jew. Also, by the word, as you point out correctly, also the word haviro means a fellow Jew. It doesn't mean any Tom, Dick, or Harry. The assumption is that Kol Yisrael haverim, and V'ahavta l're'acha kamocha. That is not said about all and any human being to the anywhere near the same extent. So this halacha states, Ahotah lahaviro, umet haviro chodem she'ivachesh mimenu mehila, and this Jew passes away before he has done Teshuvah, before he internalizes and begins to process what he has done, and that it is totally improper, and that he must do Teshuvah, and he must ask forgiveness. What is the Jew who sinned against this other Jew who's no longer alive? What does he do? Mevi asara b'nei adam, u'ma'amidam al kivro. So you bring 10 b'nei adam. B'nei adam, obviously, here it says b'nei adam, but obviously means Jews. U'ma'amidam al kivro. He takes them and asks them to accompany him to this person's grave. Wa'omer lifnehem, and he says to them, Hattati l'Hashem Elohei Yisrael. I have sinned first of all against Hashem. U'lifloni zeh, and to this person, she'asiti lo kach v'chach, in this fashion. So he has to specify what he did. Again, an act of contrition, and involves embarrassment, and that is also a kapara. V'im hayav lo mamon, if he actually owed this person money, yahziro liyorasho, he must repay that money still, if not to the person who was owed the money, then to his descendants, those who are his yorashim, those who inherit him. So if he owed a person money, and he knew this, but he omitted to do anything about it, and all of a sudden this person is no more, he cannot repay this person directly, but this person has yorashim, He has a family, he has children. He has to repay that money still. The monetary aspect does not cease to exist with that person's passing. Lo haya yodea lo yoresh, but if he does not know, is not aware of any such person, any kind of inheritor, yanihenu beveth din u'yithwadeh, he should bring the sum of money to the Beth Din, tell them what happened, say we do in front of them, and that's the most that he can do. What would the Beth Din do with such a sum of money? One assumes that the Beth Din is aware of worthy causes, deserving people, perhaps Talmidei Hachamim, Aniyim, Yethomim, Almanoth. Unfortunately, there are always people requiring special care, special consideration. The Beth Din will be aware of such things and will do something proper with that sum of money. What you do not want to do with such a sum of money is to place it in the hands of a corruptocrat. In other words, some faceless government nobody with regards to whom we have no reason to believe in his integrity and his good intentions. The fact that a person is a corruptocrat, in other words, a bureaucrat, and the term is used, corruptocrat, because it frequently transpires that they are not exactly above board. As we know, power corrupts and money corrupts, and these people, if they get their hands on a sum of money, more often than not, it will end up in the wrong place, shall we say. Very frequently, not very surprisingly, in their own pockets. So, a Beth Din is a reliable place, so it should be. I'm not saying that there are never cases where it is not so, but the assumption is that such people are not corruptocrats, but are well-intentioned tzaddikim who wish to do the right thing and will only allow that money to go to a proper and worthy cause and will not embezzle anything for themselves. That is a reasonable assumption. It's not an absolute 100% ironclad guarantee, but it's a very reasonable assumption. More reasonable than placing it in the hands of the corruptocracy. Let us continue. Halacha, Perek Gimel now. Hilchot Teshuvah. Kol ehad ve'ehad mibenei ha'adam. Yesh lo zechuyot or zachiyot ve'avonoth. All human beings, it is universally the case, or almost universally the case, that a person does good and other things that are not quite so good. Now, in terms of how we define or categorize people, a person about whom it can be said without fear of contradiction that most of what they do is positive and correct and proper. Such a person is referred to as a tzaddik, not in the unrealistic and newfangled Hasidic sense of the term tzaddik. This person is some kind of an angel, could never possibly have done anything wrong, etc. That is not a real world, and that is not real Torah. That is not how things work. That's what Rambam is telling you now. All human beings are frail and can make mistakes, and they do make mistakes. And sometimes when they did something, they weren't even making a mistake. They were very conscious of what they were doing. Later, they may regret it. They may have true remorse. But at that time, it was quite deliberate. And the opposite is Rasha is defined as someone who is generally of the opposite disposition. Strikes me that a good example of such individuals would be the so-called judges of the High Court in Israel, for example, and probably in many other countries as well, the ICC, and I can think of many other very deserving candidates for such an epithet. Mahasa le mahasa, if a person is sort of average, in other words, they do good things, they do not such good things, which is most people, Benoni, that person is referred to as Benoni, average. That's with regards to individuals. V'chen hamedina, im hayu zechuyot shel yosheveha merubot al amonotehem. If we're talking about now, the word Medina really means a large city, a walled city usually. But we can also, by extension, understand this to refer to an entire country or a nation. Im hayu zechuyot kol yosheveha merubot al amonotehem. If in general they are righteous, they do the right thing. Harezo sadaqet, such a place, such a community, such a city is referred to as righteous. Not because they are universally so at all times, but that is generally how they are. And if not, then the opposite may be said of them, that they are an evil place, an evil town, evil city, evil people. And the same is true of the world in general. Here there's already something of importance to take note of. Just a second. So here there is something that needs to be taken note of. We do generalize. The argument that you can't say that, you can't refer to this group of people or this nation as evil because there are many such individuals amongst them who do not think so, do not act so, do not wish it to be so. First of all, is that in fact the case? That frequently is not the case. People make that claim for various reasons, usually ideological, political reasons. Frequently that is not the case. But even if it is entirely true, and it usually is entirely true, that there are certain individuals, sometimes very few in number, such as in Nazi Germany or in present-day Gaza or the entire Arab Islamo-Nazi world. The vast majority are of that ilk. And there are exceptions, but they're not very, very numerous. And it's tragic that we cannot spend all our time dealing with and interacting with those righteous individuals who may exist there, who wished only to live in peace and do the right thing. But the fact is, you cannot function in this world in such a fashion, because that is simply not reality. Reality is decided by and is formed by the majority, the societal norms, the way most people think and act, etc. That is what decides the nature, the moral fiber and practical reality of a society. And the Torah, as always, works in the real world, not in some hypothetical ivory tower world. So the Torah, the Nevi'im, Hazal, and any reasonable person will refer to the reality. And that is what Rambam is telling us here, that an entire, as we're about to see, an entire place, town, country may be judged based on the reality by and large. There will be exceptions, but the exceptions must always be seen for what they are, exceptions to the rule. The rule is what counts. If a majority of people in a certain are in a certain society or country or civilization are Nazis or Islamo-Nazis or what have you, then that is the reality on the ground. That will be the reality on the ground. Rambam continues, Halacha Gimel, Adam she'amonotho merubim al zachuyotho. So if a person who is much more sinful than righteous in terms of weighing up his actions, miyad hu meth berisho. If that is the case, in an absolute sense, and there are no mitigating circumstances and considerations, then miyad hu meth berisho, he should immediately die, and Hashem will remove him from this world. Shene'emar rov avonech. In other words, sometimes it's as simple as that. V'chen medina she'avonoteha merubim miyad hi ovedeth. Whether the word miyad should be understood, by the way, in the most literal and immediate sense is questionable. But the gist of what Rambam is saying is that such a reality is unworthy of continued existence, and Hashem will bring this about. The same is true for an entire province or large city or country. That is generally very sinful. Similarly, it will be destroyed. Where do we see this? Clearly in the Torah. The outcry, that which we hear here in heaven, so to speak, based on what happens down there on earth in Sodom or Amorah, is very great, is impossible to ignore. The same is true for the entire world. We see this, of course, with the Mabul, with the flood. Im hayu awanothehem merubim miyad hem nishhatim. If once they reach a certain point, a certain level of rish'uth, of evil, they are immediately slaughtered for destruction. Shene'emar vayar Adonai ki rabba ra'atha adam. So the Torah is teaching us a very important, a very central lesson. Hashem sees and is fully aware of what goes on. How one weighs all these things up, as we're about to read in a moment, is only known to Hashem. But that is the rule of thumb. And this weighing up, this consideration of these facts and realities, it is not a mathematical calculation that anyone could add up, but rather according to it's not a quantitative consideration or calculation, but a qualitative one. It is possible for a person to do a particular act, a zechut, something positive, praiseworthy, which is very weighty, and it overrides or it counterbalances many evil things that the same person may have done. See, what Rambam is doing, one can go into all these psukim and see exactly the context, but which we won't do here. But Rambam does quote all these pesukim for a reason, to show you that all these distinctions and ideas that he's mentioning here are hinted at least, in various pesukim. Uyesh awon, and it is also true, the opposite is also true. There are crimes or sins, shehu kaneged kama zuchiyot, that a person may have committed, and which are extremely reprehensible and so terrible that they cancel out many of the positive things that he has done. Shene'emad v'hotei ahad ya'abed tova harbe, again, pasuk. So one sin can cancel out many good things, and vice versa. Wa'en shokalim ela b'da'ato shel el de'oth. Only Hashem, who is referred to as el de'oth, he who sees all and can weigh everything up, who has true da'ath, true understanding and knowledge, beyond human comprehension. En shokalim ela b'da'ato shel el de'oth. Only Hashem can make this, can weigh these things up in the balance. V'hu hayodea he'ach oruchim hazachoyot keneged ha'awonot. And Hashem knows how to make these judgments. And here Rambam adds another important piece of information, because we spoke about a person having done positive deeds, mitzvot, and negative deeds, averot. What if a person used to behave in a certain way, he did many positive things, and now his attitude towards those things is irreverent, and he essentially thinks he was acting foolishly to behave morally or properly. Therefore, Rambam says, "Kol mishe niham al misvot she'asa." A person who regrets the misvot and the positive deeds that he has done throughout his life, with aha al zachuyoth, and literally is somewhat amazed and taken aback by his own behavior in the past, not in a positive sense, but in a negative sense. In other words, he says, "Amar b'libo." He says to himself, "Uma ho'arti ba'siyatham." What a waste of time all that was. I put out all this money on this miswah, or I did all these acts of hesed, or what have you. I shouldn't have bothered. Ulai lo asiti otan. Ulai means halavai, in the sense, ulai means halavai. In other words, I wish that I had never done these things. Hare ze ibed ef kulan. In other words, the kawana has an impact, lemafrea. Just as Teshuvah has an impact, lemafrea, the opposite of Teshuvah, which is true regret and remorse at having done the right thing, that also has a very real impact retroactively. Hareze ibedef kulan. All those zechuyot are lost to him. Wa'en mazkirim lo shem zechut ba'olam. Shem is like shum. In other words, it means it's the same thing. Which means none of those zechuyot will be counted to him. He has lost them all. Shene'emar v'sidqat sadiq lo tasilanu b'yom rish'o. How can that be? That a righteous man will not be counted as righteous. That can only be en za'ela b'thohe al horishonoth. This can only be understood. So Chazal explain it. When a person has a change of heart. In other words, what we see here is that the heart, the intention, the true spiritual, intellectual, philosophical, even existential reality of a person makes all the difference. If a person behaved terribly and sinned gravely for many years, maybe most of his life, and now has a true change of heart, that is Teshuvah, that rewrites history. That rewrites the history. And the same can also work in the opposite direction. So then that's why Rambam talks about this here, for obvious reasons, because it is the opposite of Teshuvah. And they both work retroactively. And that's a very important thing to recall and to be aware of. It is also a fact that throughout history and at the present time as well, many of the greatest evildoers are people who were brought up in a Torah lifestyle, in a religious home, religious mode of living, education, what have you, and turned their back on everything. And they are frequently extremely sincere, so to speak, in their remorse and in their change of heart. And they're very, very active and very motivated to act in the opposite fashion, more so than others. We see this time and again. And that is what the famous Yiddish expression states, a meshumad is schlecht wie a goy. A meshumad is generally much worse than a goy. And with that pearl of wisdom, we shall end for today. It is a pearl of wisdom. It's important to be aware of. It will also have some bearing on things that we will see later in this perek, speaking about Meshumadim, Mosarim, etc. Hayu beruchim, חזקו ויאמץ לבבכם כל המייחלים לאדוני Shalom וניצחון על כל אויבינו מבית ומחוץ. What I just said now stems directly also from what we just said. מבית ומחוץ. בשורות טובות, ישועות ונחמות. Shalom, shalom.